All right, this is official now. Thank you for being here on this Saturday morning, June 1st, for our annual trustee training. We have with us today somebody that I was very excited to work with. I knew her in her time at Topeka Shawnee County Library. And if you don't have the pleasure of knowing her, let me introduce her. Today we'll be with Gina Millsap. She's the retired Chief Executive Officer at Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library. 2016 Gale Library Journal Library of the Year, if you remember that. It's quite an honor. She previously served as the CEO of the Ames, Iowa Public Library. She's worked in libraries for 45 years, received her Master's of Library Science from the University of Missouri. She's been recognized as 2007 Library Journal Mover and Shaker, and is a past president of the Library Leadership and Management Association, division of ALA, American Library Association. She currently works as a library consultant and executive coach. She's worked with boards for 25 years and currently serves as a board president of the YWCA of Northeast Kansas. Thank you for being here, Gina. I will let you take it away. Again, folks, put your questions in the chat and we will get underway.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everybody. I see a few names I recognize, and I'm so excited that you've joined us today. We have a few people from out of state, so we're glad you're joining us as well. So the first thing I want to say to all of you is thank you. Thank you, trustees. Thank you, library directors, for taking time on a Saturday morning to be with us. You're going above and beyond, and that's much appreciated. And really is, I think, a good example of the experiences that I had working with boards for the past 25 years. Trustees are special people. And you have to know a lot, you have to learn a lot, you have to give your time, you have to give your heart. So we appreciate you very much. I also want to tell you that we're going to be learning from each other today. Just because I say it doesn't mean it's the absolute right thing, right? I mean, I have 45 years of experience in libraries, 25 of them as a director. That doesn't mean I know everything. It just means I'm old. So if you have another idea, if you want to challenge something I've said, go for it. I want to hear from you. And questions are okay throughout the presentation. As I said earlier, this isn't about me getting through the slide deck. This is about us learning and sharing together. So put your questions in chat, and Dan, as our facilitator, will go ahead and just ask them in a timely way. So let's get started. Okay. Now I know that some people don't like icebreakers. But I'm a big believer, and actually, as a librarian, I will tell you I've done a little research, and the science actually proves that they do a couple of really important things. Research tells us that they can stimulate self-discovery, they can promote engagement and discussion, and they can build trust and personal connections. So I wanted to start out with this. If you would, and let's see, we have, how many total participants do we have now, Dan?
Oh, 41, including you, me, Robin.
Okay. I think it's going to be a little bit hard to just go through this verbally. So what I'm going to ask you to do is in the chat, would you say who you are and what library you're with, and give me one word that describes your library board. And we'll give you about 2 or 3 minutes to do that.
Those of you who are in the watch parties, you might just kind of come to a consensus for this, and it might be hard for you to type in an answer, we understand. But if you want to discuss it amongst yourselves at your watch party, feel free to.
Or if you've got 12 people, you can put in 12 words.
There you go.
And one of the things, because one of the things we'll talk about is boards don't always have to agree. As a matter of fact, disagreement and spirited discussion is a good thing. It's all about how you come to consensus.
We're getting some come in. That's excellent.
Be diverse, wonderful. Passionate, oh, I love that. Steadfast, very important. Determined. Committed. Community. Ah, love it. Devoted.
Service.
Mm. Visionary. Love it. Critical. Absolutely critical and essential. Library rebuilding. Hey, Christian. Good to see you there. My old buddy from ALA.
Stuck. Oh, geez.
Okay, we're here to help. We can help with that.
Love my Eudora, folks.
You know what? There's an honesty there. I like it.
Yeah.
It's okay to be vulnerable. You're among friends here. These are your people. Okay, I think and you can continue to add to that, knowledgeable, all of those important things. I want to kind of collect these actually, and it kind of creates a, a word salad. But one of the things that I have done this both in person and via Zoom in the past, and what always strikes me about this is that a lot of the words describe a relationship, right? It's basically a relationship that the board has both with its library and its director and with its community. And in many ways, it kind of sounds like a romance. It's passionate, it's committed, it's devoted. So in some ways, that marriage metaphor kind of works. So now I want to know what's your why. This is about you. We talked about the board. So why are you a library trustee? And a very simple way to say this, to structure this, is to do X so that. And I want you to think about your core values, what you care about, what you'd fight for. Who are you working for? Here's a couple of examples that are non-library examples. This would be for an author to write stories that entertain and inspire people. Here's a teacher's to inspire my students to reach their goals through creative teaching. It can be very simple. It doesn't have to be a lot of words, and it doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be heartfelt. Kneecapping for these questions. I hear ya. It's okay. No pressure. There's no right answer to this, right? The right answer is the one that you give. But as you think about this, we'll give you a couple minutes. As you think about this, think about what you've learned. Think about the importance of your library. And we're also going to be looking at what I'd like to do, Dan, is collect these and share them back as part of a follow-up because it's inspiring.
Yeah, already I'm seeing some really inspiring responses.
I mean, I love the emotion that's in this and the determination and the sense of community that you have.
That word keeps coming up, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Everyone feels welcome, right? Build a new library. Hey, you're on it.
I'm guessing that would be the Meriden Ozaki.
I've known some folks in Meriden, and I know that they've been working on that for a while, so that's exciting.
Absolutely.
Supporting children's literacy, absolutely. As you look at what others are contributing, think about how you feel about that. If you want to add that to your own particular why. Because think about what we're seeing here. There's a lot of accumulated experience and wisdom here. Let's take advantage of it. Go into this. If you don't know the folks that are with us today, get to know them. What I found is that building a network is one of the most important things I ever did for myself professionally and for the libraries that I led. It certainly benefited me, but it also benefited the libraries that I worked in.
And I would add, Gina, of course, that people might say, well, how do we do that after today? And I just want to offer you to reach out to the Northeast Kansas Library System. I think what we do is we connect people to each other and to resources. That's our main thing. So if you need a start, an entry point, just reach out to me personally.
I think that's wonderful. And, we're very fortunate in this state to have that mid-layer, that works of regional libraries that works to support local libraries and also works with the state library as well. Not all states have that, but it definitely improves the quality of library service statewide. Well, thank you, everybody. We're going to continue to collect those and we are going to share them back with you. And I want to see them. And if you don't mind, I won't attribute them to anybody, but you know what, as I build my presentations, I want, especially as I'm talking about Kansas and how proud I am to be a Kansas librarian, and I'm talking to librarians from other places, I'm gonna boast a little bit about us. So how about that? Okay. So why did I call this presentation a playbook? The original definition of a playbook is actually from the 16th century, and it literally and literarily meant a book of plays. That makes sense. Plays that were written down and bound together, like Shakespeare's plays that actually only happened after his death. It's come to mean everything from the diagrams of plays that football coaches like Andy Reid uses on the sidelines of the Chiefs games, to strategies that political parties use to win elections. Most good leaders have a playbook. Now, it's not always necessarily written down. It may be in their head, but it means that they're focused on how to make their cause or their organization successful. I'm suggesting that library trustees, actually, and library directors need a playbook too. It means that we have strategies for how to make our library successful, how to support and defend our mission, how to get the funding we need, how we support and for trustees, how trustees support their directors and encourage a culture of service and excellence, how we serve our communities, and how we deal with challenges and problems. And we'll all be better at this if we discuss and document our strategies for the present, our visions for the future, and what we've learned from our experiences, good and bad. And I'll probably say this more than once. I have no problem sharing with you mistakes I've made. And what I'm going to say to you is that don't be boring. We're all going to make mistakes, and sometimes they're really valuable learning experiences. Don't make mistakes somebody else has already made. Learn from that and make new, exciting ones. Okay. So I was really kind of curious about this word, where it actually came from. It actually comes, as you can see there, from an Old Norse word, tresta, from 1200 AD, which means to trust, rely on, make strong and safe. So that tresta comes from the word trust. The first time the word trustee as a noun was actually used is from the writings of a British parliamentary leader, John Hampden, in 1636 in England. And actually, he was complaining about taxes. But each one of you is a community leader that's entrusted to make the library strong and safe as a public institution. part of the job of being a trustee is to build trust. So in Kansas, there are 313 public libraries. Each of them, by Kansas statute, has a board of trustees. Most of them are city or township libraries, but there are district libraries. We have our regional library system. There are county libraries. In most cases, the board members are appointed by elected officials. And I say in most cases because there are some exceptions. For instance, district library boards by Kansas statute are elected. Some boards have more than 7 members. So I was trying to count up, and this isn't exact, but I think there's about 2,500, give or take, public library trustees in the state of Kansas alone. Okay, that's a lot of folks engaged in library governance and decision-making and resource management. So when you think about it, that's pretty powerful. It also requires a lot of knowledge and sharing. So let's talk a little bit about the job. And I will emphasize this over and over again. This is a partnership with your director. Well, let's talk about the mission first. Why is it important? And here's what I'm going to say to you right now. If you don't have a mission, you need one. It's because it articulates why the library exists and what it does. A good mission doesn't have to be fancy, and it should not be long. My rule of thumb was it should be able to fit on a pen, that you could hand out to people and hand out to staff. It should create a picture of the library's role in the community, and it can guide you in decision making. And as I said, if you don't have one, get one. If you can't say it right now, I'm going to tell you you don't have one, even if there's one listed on your website. So policies we'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. Resources. You'll notice I'm not using the word budget here. A budget is a tool. Resource development and management is a much bigger set of actions that position the library to do things it needs to do to serve its community. It can be a range of options, from advocating for more money from a city council or a county commission, to asking voters to approve a bond issue, to working with a friends or foundation group to raise private funds. And these are all ways to meet the gap between public funding and the total financial needs of the library. Effectiveness. How do you know if your library is doing good work? How do you know if it's meeting the needs of your community? You need to work with your director to determine what standards and data you'll use to help you assess how the library is doing. One of your jobs as trustees is to ask really good questions. How do we know we're doing a good job for our community, for kids, for teens, for adults and seniors? Ask questions like, how often do we say no to a customer request? Do we make decisions with our customers as the priority? Are we being true to our mission and the values that public libraries use to set directions and goals? Are we available when people need us? Planning. What's your vision for the future? I had a really interesting discussion / argument actually with a state librarian who's a good friend of mine many years ago about the need for a vision statement, and which should articulate your vision. Her basically perspective is that they were unnecessary, that the mission and a strategic plan was enough. As a CEO, library CEO, my perspective is that if I have an image of where we're going, I can get us there. And that vision is developed and improved by sharing, right? The director, the board, the staff, our customers, our community. But again, if we don't have a common goal in mind, how do we know where we're going? Life in our communities don't stand still. Are we thinking about how we'll meet future needs? How do we ensure we stay relevant and that we grow? How will we take advantage of opportunities to partner with other organizations to expand our reach and impact? So this is what I'm going to say. Boards that spend all their time talking about the past or reading reports about things that have already happened aren't being strategic. Boards should spend at least a third to half of their time thinking, talking, and making decisions about how the library will grow and change to meet the changing needs of your community. So here's just one example. 4 years after the initial shutdown of schools and students post-pandemic, students are still playing catch up. What can public libraries do to partner with parents and schools to help kids make up the reading gap? And I'll talk a little bit about this later in terms of where libraries can make a difference, and that environmental scanning and understanding what's going on in our larger communities is so critical to how we think about how the library can be most impactful and contribute to the well-being of our communities. Advocating. We all know libraries and the freedom to read are being challenged, and they're being challenged in ways that we haven't seen before. There's no guarantee that funding and other important resources like knowledgeable, appropriately compensated employees will be addressed. Trustees have to be vigilant about advocating for the interests of the library. That can be something as simple as sharing your why you're on the library board with a neighbor, or speaking with your elected officials about the importance of the library in your community. Hiring, evaluating, and working with the director. The first thing I'm going to say is don't settle. What do I mean by that? By that, I mean, if you're hiring a director and you have significant doubts about that person's ability to commit to and do the job, don't hire them. The library, the board, the staff, and that individual will all suffer for that decision in terms of service, reputation, and staff morale. Once you have the right director, develop mutually agreed to goals that help the director focus on priorities and help the board assess the work the director's doing. Finally, look at this relationship as a partnership. Just as the board must work as a team, the director and the board are a team. We work together to position the library for success. That means open communication, collaborative goal setting and planning, working together to educate decision makers and stakeholders about the library's value in building the community and making a difference in people's lives.
Can I pause just for one
Please
second?
do. Please do.
Sometimes if you haven't worked in an organization that has strong mission statements and vision statements, I think it can be difficult to know, like, what's the objective of each. Can you just break it down for somebody who might be here who's thinking, I don't know the difference between the two of them?
Between mission and vision?
Yes.
Mission, it's set in the present, right? It basically is it's the why of the library. Just as you gave your why of why you serve on the board, a mission should answer the question, why does the library exist? Right? And it can go into a little more detail. It's wordsmithing mission statements can be a very challenging thing. And unfortunately, frequently what happens with them is that they get way too wordy.
Come on, sis.
The vision statement is about the future. The vision statement should be aspirational, while the mission statement is rooted in the present and the why of why you get up and do the work every day, why the library's there. The vision statement describes a better world with the library in it. Does that make sense?
I think that does. Thank you for just backtracking a little bit on that.
Sure, no, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want you to do, Dan. So that's great.
Ben Wolfcutter here, and in my notes, I have added what Heather had to say, who I team with Heather, and I want to, in a practical way, add strength, voice, and confidence so we complete a new building, which is not aspirational. But Heather's addition of so that my kids and my grandkids and our community have a vibrant library in service to our community, I think that that's aspirational. So when we get back together, I don't know whether we have a mission statement or a vision statement, but I do um, think that we have a team and a director, an assistant director, who would be willing to say, okay, let's take a look at that and how does that go? So I just want to give that kind of shout out of how I partnered those two ideas
I
from
love
somebody
it.
I get to work with.
And you've nailed it. One way to look at this is building a new building is exciting. Building a new building is a strategy or a project, right? It's one of the ways you're going to get there. But as you said, if you think about, so what's the end game here? If we do this, what's happened? How is our community better? What difference is the library going to make? Paint that picture and articulate that, and then go back and you can then describe, and our short-term goal then is to build a new building. And this is how it's going to help make that happen. Make sense? So I'm going to say a list of duties is just that. It's a list of duties. It doesn't say what the statute in any state that addresses public library law. It doesn't tell you what you need to know, what not to do, or the best way to perform the duties that are assigned to you. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do this job. And I encourage each of you to consider how you can become even a more experienced and competent library trustee. The fact is, there's more than one way to work with a director to govern a successful library. But there are some key values and principles and actions and tools that we as library leaders must believe in and have in common, and those tools that we have in our pocket. For instance, you're going to hear the word trust a lot today. Library boards, for the most part, not always, sometimes they are elected officials themselves, but for the most part, they're appointed by elected officials. That means you as trustees are public officials. To be truly effective as a governing and decision-making body, you have to evolve from that group of individuals who may or may not know each other into a group that's committed to working together for the good of the library and the community. Individuals who care about the library into what we typically think of as a team. The first step is to think of yourself that way. So what's a team? There's lots of books about this. If you go to Amazon, you can probably find 500 books on teams. But boiled down, a team is a group of people that are working towards a common goal or set of goals or a common mission. And that's to ensure that the library is providing the best possible service for its community. Now, if it were that simple, all boards would be engaged, informed, great at planning, resourceful at providing money, expert decision makers, and committed to serving everyone in the community. And in a lot of cases, teams have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But library boards don't end. Their goal is to work for the continued success of the library, so the board has to work together. But there's a bit more to it than that. So I don't know if any of you have seen this series of books. Eat This, Not That. And of course, not that is all the really good stuff, like potato chips and Cheetos. But this is going to be the library trustee edition of Eat This, Not That. It's going to be Do This, Not That. Because what you do or what you don't do can affect everyone in your library and your community. So here's some ideas for acting for positive impact and success for the board and the library. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that first one. Respond, don't react. This is important. As a public official, you may meet people who have questions, who may challenge you, who may not agree with the decision that you've made, who may not like a book that the library owns and is circulating. So what's the difference between responding and reacting? Have you noticed that the way we respond to comments or questions from others seems to be divided into two camps? They're either reactions or responses. Those are very different approaches, and they seem to generate quite a bit of disagreement. And if you think about it, this happens all the time when a group of people is discussing almost anything in person and certainly online. So I'm a librarian, had to do a little research, had to poke around, and there's actually neuroscience research on how and why people respond to something someone says or writes. In a nutshell, here's the difference. A reaction's automatic. It's fast, easy, it's unconscious. It enters our head and comes out of our mouths. The problem is it often fuels more reactivity and stress. A response is intentional, it's slower, it requires attention, and creates more connection and sometimes peace. And this is what some experts say about that. If you want to connect with someone to resolve a disagreement, express an opposing opinion, deliver bad news, and establish some common ground, you must focus on the issue, not the person. In other words, you have to see the person, you see a person with a problem instead of seeing the person as a problem. A lot of the partisanship we see politically and socially basically labels people as the problem. That automatically creates divisiveness and this sense of you're the enemy. That's considered the end game. If your goal is to reach common ground, it's not going to be by saying the first thing that comes into your head, unless it's something really brilliant and will generate good feelings. Second, show up. This is really critical. Show up and be present. I'll say both of those things. That means you make attending board meetings, educational sessions like this, and library events a priority. It makes a difference in how the board functions, and it affects your reputation with the staff and with the community. Speak up. Participate in discussions. Ask questions. Offer ideas. This is what it means to be an engaged board member. Support decisions. There may be times that you don't all agree. That's okay. Actually, that's very healthy to have spirited discussions, because if you have diversity on your board, you're going to have various perspectives. What matters is how you reach consensus and how you support decisions after they're made. You know, I've always said anybody should be able to say anything they wish as long as it's said respectfully. However, once the board has voted and a decision has been made and you get up from that table, the board then speaks with one voice. That is not the time to share the fact that you're not happy with a decision. That's going to happen on occasion. It may be you, it may be somebody else that doesn't agree with the decision that the board has made. But to be a good board member, once that decision is made, you need to support it. And if you can't, then you have to ask yourself, is this the right job for me? This is a big one for the library directors in our group. I have to say, almost without exception, I have worked with fantastic library trustees who were very supportive, and we could have honest discussions, and they could challenge me, they could ask me questions, they could disagree, but they didn't attempt to actually do my job for me. And that's what I mean by this. It's really important to know, understand, and respect the difference between the director's job and your job as a trustee. You have one employee to whom you delegate the responsibility for running the library, so let them do it. Equity. Make sure everyone's welcome at the library and that your policies treat everyone equitably. This is where, as we talk about DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusiveness, and belonging, those are important values. But sometimes we say that we are practicing those values, but we haven't really taken a close look at our policies or our practices to make sure that we are not unintentionally creating barriers for use or access. So it's very important to work with your director to examine those policies. Policies. Support the director when he or she enforces the policies that you have approved. I will tell you this, the best way to end up in a lawsuit is to have a policy and not follow it, whether that's a personnel policy or a policy that applies to library operations like book selection or services. If the policy isn't working, then address that. But the first thing you do is you follow your policies. Power. This is a word that makes a lot of library folks uncomfortable. But the reality is, library trustees have a lot of power and authority that is given to them through Kansas statute or the statute in your particular state. You have authority and power to uphold the freedom to read, to resist and say no to people who want to determine what is appropriate for everyone to read, to advocate for and explore ways to get better funding for the library, and to compensate the director and the staff for the work that they do. Use it wisely, but use it. One of my mantras is money doesn't get to be the excuse for doing excellent work and doing what's right or getting that library building built, right? We're going to get that done. We're going to be creative about it, and we're going to do what it takes to get it done. And there's a trap that even the best leaders and boards can fall into. It's called a scarcity mentality. One way of looking at this is opposite mindsets. In other words, a scarcity mentality versus an abundance mentality. Stephen Covey, the great management guru, initially coined these terms in his best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Scarcity mentality refers to people seeing life as I like to think of it as a cherry pie because that's my favorite. But people see life as a finite pie so that if one person takes a big piece, then there's less for everybody else, right? So that's one way of looking at resources. And many people, especially in government and nonprofit worlds, have been conditioned to have a scarcity mentality and to use money as the excuse for non-action. That scarcity mentality is what keeps many of us from achieving our goals. An abundance mindset takes a different approach. It presumes there's enough pie for everyone and understands that it's up to the board and the director to figure out how to get the piece of the pie that they need to succeed. So that's a mindset. Library values. Conflict most often occurs when you may be uncomfortable with a particular book or film and or someone complains to you directly about a book. You follow your policies and explain that it's not the library's role to tell anyone what they may not read, only to provide options so that there is something for everyone. This can be difficult for some people, especially if you personally find something on, say, in a library that you didn't know the library owned. So here's what I used to say. If the library that I work in were the Gina Public Library, there are a lot of things that would not be on the shelf, but it's not. It's the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library, and therefore it has titles, it has books, it has films, it has music that appeal to someone in our community. And that's our goal, that if you walk in the doors of the library, first of all, everyone is welcome and everyone will find something that appeals and speaks to them. That also means that there are going to be things on the shelf that we personally find offensive. And that's what we have to commit to and support and be willing to explain when people have complaints about books that they object to. Connect. You use your personal and your professional network to advocate for and educate about the library. All of you who are trustees know other people in the community. You know them through work, you know them through volunteering, you know them through your church, you know them because you live in a certain neighborhood. every single relationship that you have in your community can be valuable to the library, because the library has something also of value to offer to virtually any individual. And part of the job of the trustee is to help people see that. You don't think the library is something for you? Au contraire, let me tell you. Learning. We know libraries are complex organizations. We provide a lot of services and collections and programs. You know, when you're trying to develop a mission statement, or you're trying to do a branding exercise, for instance, it becomes very difficult if you basically are looking at this huge shopping list, you know, of things that a public library does. And they're also public and publicly funded organizations. What that means is that there's always more to learn to enable you to advocate, to make better decisions, and to plan for the future. Keep learning, like in situations like this. Let's see, it is 10:42. We're going to take like a 5-minute break now, to allow you to go get that cup of coffee or beverage of your choice, take a little biological break, or do whatever you need to do.
Yes, thank you for giving us just a moment to stretch our legs. So I will we'll come back at 10:47, I guess. Well, you've got a timer.
I know the sound music is really annoying, so I'm going to turn it off.
I don't think we can even hear it through there, so we're good. All right, we'll be right back. Gina, I was thinking about the policies that are barriers of entry that we don't think about. Do you have any thoughts on like what are the most surprising policies you found that were barriers to entry that you hadn't considered but found in review? Fines comes to mind.
For us in Jefferson City, we required a driver's license to use to get a guest pass for the computers if you didn't have a card. And I didn't realize, I mean, I'm privileged. I've always had a driver's license.
Right.
I didn't realize how big of a barrier to entry that was until we put it in place.
Mm-hmm. I had a really great experience last week. There was a patron who was upset because their card had basically been banned because of fines from 5 years ago. And it wasn't, they were at a different library in our system. And I ended up calling the library who had owned the materials 5 years ago. And the director just looked at the account and said, I don't even want that book back. Even if they brought it back, and it's been 5 years, you know, let's give this person, let's wipe the slate, and let's go on. This was a person with children that was trying to check out materials for their young child. And I was just like, oh, what a great answer to that. We're going to forget the $60 and give somebody a reset who now has a new family. I was so
And
thankful
the
for that.
kids part of that is so important because I know I've heard a story recently about kids who are now grown-ups. They have jobs. One of them is a police officer. They still hate their local public library because they were not allowed to check stuff out as a kid because of fines and such.
Mhm.
And so, and I guess they had a really negative interaction with the director, and it's a thing. It can be generational
Right.
if you don't, show some compassion or try to work with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are barriers all over the place that people don't think about.
I remember when the Anythink Library in Colorado, changed its name and kind of evolved into a very different library under Pam's leadership. Compassion was at the top of their list in terms of their library values. And I thought that was really insightful and wonderful.
All right, we are back. Our timer has timed out. So let's get started again.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. Dan, can you hear me okay? Okay. All right, very good. Okay, let's talk about now the tools that we need to do our best work. To do that good work and to provide competent governance, you need good tools. So here's some of the tools you need to do your best work. And when you use them in collaboration with your team of trustees, you keep them in good repair and ready to use. So we're going to pull a few out of the toolbox and talk about why they're important. And we'll come back to this list. This is I have a separate presentation that I do on ethics. And I went through a lot of quotes about ethics. A lot of people talk about it. I'm not sure as many people practice it. But I love this one. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. It's probably the most simple definition and I think one of the most powerful. And if you'll see below on your slide, I've also included a link to ALA's Public Library Trustee Ethics Statements. Like a lot of ALA policies and support documents that the American Library Association provides to our profession, this is one that can be a good tool for libraries to use. So there's a lot of definitions, as I said, for ethics, but that they really are the standards of behavior that tell us what we ought to do in our personal and professional lives. They apply to all individuals, organizations, and society as a whole. High ethical standards are especially important in the sector that we operate in, which is the public sector, because they are the key to credibility and they lead to increased support for our agencies and political leaders. Ethics are part of the job for all public officials, including library trustees. And as I said, the American Library Association has that statement of ethics that your board can use and adapt for your needs. So we've already talked about Kansas library law a little bit. If you're zooming in from another state and you're not familiar with the library law in your state, highly recommend that you get those statutes, pull those statutes up online and take a gander at them. Public supported library service is based upon the First Amendment right of free expression. The publicly supported library is a government entity that provides free, equal, and equitable access to information for all people of the community it serves. When this purpose is confirmed in local policies and practices, the library then is a designated limited public forum for access to information. For example, when library policies or practices make meeting rooms, exhibit spaces, bulletin boards available for public use, these spaces are designated as, and this is a legal term, limited public forums for the exchange of information. Bylaws. Now, the world's divided into two kinds of people. People who love bylaws and people who have lives. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Bylaws are very, very important. But I have to say, writing them and revising them has never been my favorite job, but it's very, very important. And I'm telling you that I'm sharing my own individual weakness, and flawed leadership here, because I'm telling you, that's not the right way to feel about it. Because bylaws are key to how the board is managed. They contain the basic rules for the conduct of the board's business and affairs. The bylaws can contain provisions for managing the board's business that isn't covered in the statutory law. For example, how officers are selected, when and how meetings are conducted, what committees the board has established. Bylaws should provide continuity, consistency, and equity in how the board conducts its business. And this is especially important when there's a change in leadership. As trustees leave the board, new ones are appointed or elected, or a new director is hired. And then policies. Libraries adopt administrative policies and procedures to regulate the organization and the use of library materials and services and facilities. These policies and procedures could have, unintentionally, have the effect of restricting, denying, or creating barriers to access to the library as a public forum. Library policies and procedures that impinge upon First Amendment rights are subject to a higher standard of review than may be required in the policies of other public services and facilities. So here's my bit of advice. Review policies regularly. A good way to do this painlessly is to review and discuss a policy at each board meeting. First of all, it's a good way to make sure all trustees are familiar with the policies and understand them, because you've approved them. And to hear your director explain how policies are implemented by the staff on a day-to-day basis. And part of that should be a discussion about, is this policy working? Is it working as intended? Have we unintentionally created barriers to access to the library? Is it simply not possible for the staff to, is it not giving the staff the help it needs or the tools it needs in handling problems? Say, this frequently comes up, say, with the conduct in the library policy. Where do we draw lines? At what point do we ask someone to leave the library? That sort of thing. How do we make sure we're not impinging on people's civil rights? So again, very important that these policies not just be passed one time and stuck in a book or stuck in an online archive. They are living documents, and they need to be treated that way. So here's our list back. Knowing your community. It's important to know all of your community, not just the parts that you live and work in. Do you know the demographics of your town or county? Do you know the school district that children attend and how many kids qualify for free and reduced lunch? Do you know who the major employers are, the small business owners, the nonprofit and government organizations that conduct business in your community? Do you know the social and economic status of people who live there? These are just some examples of how you develop a holistic understanding of the residents the library serves. The Library Bill of Rights. Interestingly enough, the Library Bill of Rights has been around since its adoption by the American Library Association in 1939. And that actually coincided with the US's entry into World War II. So think about that time period and what was happening in Europe. There were book burnings, there were all kinds of violations and horrible actions that were occurring that took away people's life and liberty. So that was the impetus for that. It has no legal authority, but it is a tool. It's based on First Amendment rights, and it's meant to help library boards and staff support open access to information and intellectual freedom. It's a tool. Facilitation and meeting participation. This is something that actually gets neglected quite a bit. A lot of people who apply to be on a board, run for city council, many of them don't really have previous experience in working within a group or even leading a group. And that's okay, but there needs to be a commitment to learning how to do that and being a good facilitator. Library boards have their discussions, their planning, and their decision-making in public meetings too. It's important that the board or committee chairs know how to facilitate those meetings to ensure that all voices are heard, discussions are civil, decisions are made equitably and in accordance with the library's mission and future plans, and in our state, and that the spirit and intent of the Kansas Open Meetings Law is observed. Part of the responsibility of being a board member is to participate in discussions and votes, to listen to all points of view, even ones you don't agree with. And that's while keeping the library's mission, policies, and values in mind. And then there's data. Libraries collect all kinds of data, right? A lot of it's counts and statistics. We do it for planning, for developing and evaluating services. That could include circulation, and that's changed a lot over the years, certainly since I entered the profession, and how much weight we give to circulation. Visits, collection sizes, acquisitions, ebooks, and other digital resources, and how those are used. The reference transactions that we have, and program attendance. And there's actually many more that may even be more relevant in this day and age, depending on what resources or platforms you have access to collect that information. And another thing to keep in mind is there is data available at the state and national level to compare your library's performance to comparable libraries. There's also important community data to be considered as the director and the board assess how successful the library is in serving its community. For instance, your local community may do a resident satisfaction survey in which the library may be included. In my experience, fire department and library tend to be at the top of the list, and that is it's a good thing to know. It is another way of advocating for the library, of demonstrating the library's value, and in educating the library about educating the community about the importance and the status of the library in the community. Yes. Actually, I should put guts in the toolkit, shouldn't I? Although it sounds kind of gross. But by guts, I mean courage, of course. The reality is, libraries are being challenged now, but libraries have always been challenged. Through the course of my career, we have always had to justify our existence. In the past few years, there's been a well-organized effort to control what libraries are providing to their communities. And as we know, it's one thing for parents to determine what their children read and do at their public library. And more importantly, cannot read and do. That is every parent's right, certainly. It's up to them to enforce it, not the library. But it's quite another thing for an individual or a group to attempt to make that decision for the whole community. They have no legal or ethical right to do so. And trustees are the guardians of this. It's up to trustees as the governing board to speak with one voice and uphold library values and policies and access. It's an opportunity to educate the community about their freedom to use the library as they wish, to resist efforts to deny access to books or anything else. And this isn't easy because people can become very emotional, sometimes even unpleasant about issues that they feel strongly about. They may be reacting instead of responding, right? It's also important to realize that even if someone is critical of the library or demanding that books be removed or restricted, they are our fellow residents. They may be our neighbors, and they deserve respect and a hearing. They may treat us as the enemy. We do not treat them as the enemy. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It does mean you must listen and ultimately be clear that the board is not there to censor or prevent people from reading what they wish. Sometimes the most important tool in your toolbox is courage to do the right thing, which in my experience is rarely the easy thing, is it? So, what challenges are public libraries facing these days? I made this list. There could be more, but I didn't want to depress everyone. And actually, you saw the pink toolkit. That's Barbie's toolkit. I live in Barbie's dream house. I'm the eternal optimist. I personally feel like if you're working in libraries now as a director, if you're a public library trustee, it's never been a better time to do that, right? Because the flip side of being challenged is a lot more people are paying attention to what's going on in public libraries. And that gives us an opportunity to advocate and articulate our values. So here are some of the challenges we're facing now. And I want you to note again, I'm not including money. Money doesn't get to be the excuse for inaction. If something is important, the goal should be to figure out how to get the resources. That could be money, it could be people, it could be partners, it could be other assets. So foot traffic. The pandemic and public health concerns caused a lot of libraries to close or limit physical access to the library. That was 4 years ago now. People stopped visiting the library. They lost the habit of library utilization unless they were using us online, as they did with virtually all public spaces. Now, visits have increased greatly, but they aren't always at pre-pandemic levels. I'd be very curious to know from this group, what are you seeing in your libraries now? Have you reached attendance again or visits that were at pre-pandemic levels? Are they reduced, or maybe they're even bigger than they were before? So we need to understand what's happening in our local communities. But I'll point out, it's not just libraries. Look at how retail stores have reduced their hours. Look at the decline of the traditional mall. We have to be looking at all of these environmental factors and understanding that this also affects how we view libraries and how we continue to increase their value to the community. Misinformation. Librarians are trained to provide accurate, factual information. But as we know, it's incredibly easy to spread rumors and untruths online. Trust is and must be a priority in how libraries provide information. One of the things that has contributed to the good reputation that public libraries have, even among non-users of libraries, is the fact that we are a trusted public institution. It takes decades, centuries of good work to build trust. It can be broken very quickly. So it's very important that we treat everyone equally and that we welcome everyone, regardless of what they may say, their who they are politically, what they believe. One of the things I remember saying after the 2016 presidential election, some people were happy, some people were very unhappy. And what I said to our staff was, I know all of us have our own personal political views. We have to leave them at the door. We have to welcome everyone who walks in the doors of our library, because all of them are members of our community. They may be our neighbors, and trust is going to be the coin of the realm. We have to be the institution and the people that everyone can trust. And we'll do the best we can with that. It's not always possible, but it won't be because we have elected not to take the high road. Reading. Reading's down, folks. In 2022, 53% of US adults read literature and or books of some kind. That's compared to 57% in 2017. Kids are also reading less. Are you familiar with a phenomenon called decline by 9? it's really reaching a crisis point for publishers and educators. According to Scholastic, which is a well-known children's publisher, at age 8, 57% of kids say they read books for fun most days. At age 9, only 35% do. That's an incredible drop. But it's also an opportunity. And I'm going to say this about every single one of these. Every single one of these challenges is also an opportunity in terms of how we think about it and how we address it. Civility and civic engagement. Many people who work in public services, including librarians, report that respectful, reasonable, polite behavior by customers, we've seen a bit of a decline in that in recent years. Not surprisingly, these behaviors are accompanied by a decline in participation in public life. But again, public libraries can model that good behavior by treating everyone well. Vulnerable people, people who are struggling because of mental health problems, homelessness, poverty, and substance abuse have always found libraries to be a haven. When I entered the profession in 1975, we were dealing with that as well and struggling to come up with ways of helping them have a good library experience. We welcome them when no one else does because everyone's welcome at the library. But the sheer number of people who are dealing with these challenges has increased. And libraries in their communities are struggling with how to deal with folks who have problems and continue to manage the library in a way that everyone feels welcome and safe. You need to make sure your policies are up to date. Staff must have the appropriate training and that you have adequate security procedures so that all visitors and staff do feel safe. I'm not saying this is easy. And many libraries are struggling to find the resources to deal with these issues. Some now have hired social workers, for instance. But ignoring it is not an option. Book banning. I've mentioned this a bit. The reality is there's always been challenges to library materials, but like serving vulnerable people, the scale of the opposition and the organization of groups who want to control what the community reads has increased. It's critical to follow your policies and be clear about what you will and won't do as a board. Lack of diversity in the profession. So when I entered the library profession in 1975, that is the previous century, I come from the 1900s, we were 80% white and female. Guess what we are now? Anybody want to guess? Anybody want to put it in chat? Yep, I see some guesses here. It's actually I went back and looked. We're actually now 83% white and female. That doesn't mean that we don't have people of color who have come into our profession and who are having great impact as library leaders. We are seeing more of that. One thing that we need to keep in mind in Kansas and that you need to be aware of in your state as well. In 2021, about almost 13% of Kansas residents were Hispanic or Latino. A further 76% of the population is white, and almost 11% of Kansas residents were of 2 or more races. We know that people feel more comfortable in situations where they can see and speak with people who look like them and who speak their language. I'm going to say this about it. Coping and devising solutions to all of these issues could be its own workshop. And if you're interested in that, let Nichols Consultants know, right, Dan? Very good. And I'd love to be invited back because I want to talk about this more too. And, you know, I'm seeing some things here as with the decline by 9. The Rossville's reporting summer reading time ice cream reward program is working. They're seeing more participation. Johnson County foot traffic's still down. I will say just anecdotally, what I'm seeing in terms of decreasing foot traffic, it does my heart good to see this. I'm at the Topeka and Shawnee County Public Library on a Saturday morning. It's the first day of summer reading, and the children's exhibit in the art gallery is its opening day. And so this is the parking lot is full, and nothing makes my heart sing more than seeing, you know, a parking lot or, you know, just crowds of people coming into the library. But we still need strategies for dealing with these situations. So here's one of my final pieces of advice. As trustees, you are leaders first. As a director, you are a leader first. Sometimes when I'm talking to directors, I say to them, stop thinking like a librarian. And I don't mean that in any derogatory way. I've been a librarian for 46 years, and I'm incredibly proud of that. And this profession has been so good to me. But you have to think differently as a leader. And you have to think of yourselves that way. In partnership with your director, you use your expertise, your skills, your tools, your vision, and your judgment, because you're there to position the library, and in some cases to protect the library and its mandate to serve everyone. There's that word again. Building trust is essential, and it starts with you. Working with the director to live the mission in the present, developing a shared vision for the future, implementing equitable and prudent policies, having a commitment to quality management, services, excellent customer service, strong financial stewardship and resource development, and always, always advocating for the library are the keys to being a competent and strategic board. And remember, what you do and how you do it is 100 times more important and powerful than what you say. People don't always hear you. They watch what you do to see what you do, and if it aligns with what you say, that they notice. You are essential to the library's success and good reputation, and you can do this. The fact that you're here today speaks volumes for your commitment. So you have a big job, and it requires a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of resources available for library trustees. I've just put a few on here. There is a public library trustee manual just for Kansas trustees. Download it and read it. It's an excellent resource. And Dan, did you tell me that it's going to be updated? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, so the public library standards, or actually guidelines, has been in committee since last September. I've been heading that challenge. So that's one document. I just put a link into the regional systems website as well, along with the state library. That's another place you can get some of these kind of statewide documents. So the standards slash guidelines is what we're going to rename it. That's going to be released, I believe, it's signed off hopefully by the state library at the end of the summer. And then the public library trustee handbook is up for review for starting this September. So the one that you'll find right now will say 2020 on it. But just know that there isn't a newer version yet because we haven't started writing it. But I'm guessing because we took a kind of a leap in the standards document, and they all kind of have this relationship with each other. And you'll also find that NECL's accreditation standards are very closely tied to public library standards of Kansas. So all of them kind of have this relationship with each other. And so when I feel like when we see a big change in standards, and this isn't anything drastic, some of it's just formatting, maybe being a little bit more aspirational, but yes, as those kind of develop, I would expect the trustee handbook. So those can be good places to to look to kind of measure where your library is at. Mike McDonald just put in a link to the professional collection from Neckles. And that is a great resource. I'm glad he reminded us of that. Neckles, as part of our budgeting cycle, will keep an eye out for library professional resources. And we yes, have those at our office, and they are available to be loaned from your library, so by our courier service. So there's and Jesse Harris from our office is our manager of that. So there's always fresh resources that are just kind of current about everything library world. So definitely something to check out and be aware of.
Thank you. I would also encourage trustees to consider your director as your personal librarian. That individual is a wealth of information and is your partner in learning and growing. And so just remember that that can start in terms of learning experiences. The other thing I would encourage you to do is seek feedback from your director. Frequently library boards evaluate their directors. That would be a whole other workshop, right? In terms of director evaluation. But we don't talk nearly as much about board evaluation, self-evaluation for the board, but also seeking feedback from your director in terms of how are you doing? How are you doing in terms of supporting your director and fulfilling the role of trustee? Having an honest dialogue about that could be, it may not be easy, but it could be very valuable. Now it's your turn. If you haven't posted anything or you have a question, now's your chance.
While people are considering that, there was a comment in the chat, and they actually were talking about something that was on my mind when you were talking about reading, because I visited the Burlingame Library a couple of weeks ago, and the director was talking about this book challenge for adults that she's been running, and every month they choose a different genre for the community to read, and so they will feature on the first shelf that you walk in every month. And so I think it was classics, and they have awarded prizes that Brandy has purchased, and she said that people are just really excited about it. And she was just amazed that everybody was reading these classics, and it was just like that competitive edge, I guess.
Uh-huh.
That was and then probably a prize, and I think one of the coolest stories I'll share is that there was a person who only read true crime, and the director mentioned that she saw a change in that patron when they started reading some other genres, and just she just saw a change in the personality just from being exposed to something that was outside of their wheelhouse. So I just thought that was great to hear about in Burlingame. And I've heard other stories similar. Pomona has been doing some challenges as well. So maybe maybe there's something to this whole summer reading challenge.
Well, and getting adults to participate is indeed a triumph. Somebody would also ask about helping a new board chair learn to facilitate. I started to respond to it, but I'm going to respond to it verbally too. When I was still the CEO here, we did intensive training in meeting management and facilitation, and we used a system that started with a book called The Secret to Masterful Meetings. I think that's the name of it, but we'll get it. And I think you may have added it to your professional collection. I absolutely recommend that you read it. We actually used it with our staff. All of our managers were trained in this particular meeting management process. And we had like 40 staff members that were trained because we operated a lot of staff teams and committees. And we wanted to be sure that people were doing their best work in groups. And that would certainly apply to boards as well. Actually, I think it should be required for anybody who's working in any kind of public capacity in groups, whether that's a city council, but you know, that nobody's asked me to legislate that, so. But we will get the exact citation on that.
Gina,
And yes,
actually, I just got a private message asking me about a book to lead a
Yeah.
meeting. And I was like, years ago, Gina told me The Secrets to Masterful Meetings by Michael Wilkinson.
that's it. That's it.
And I've been using that. We actually did a book club thing. You were involved. We did it by email mostly, but we did a book club where we discussed the book as library directors in Nichols and years and years ago. And then we met for lunch, I think, but to, you know, finish off the book club. But each week we'd have a chapter discussion about it next.
I remember that.
chapters.
Yeah.
It was really great. It was very useful. And if we don't have it in the public, in our professional collection, I have it on my desk or in my bookshelf in my office. So I would be happy to loan it out too.
And you know, it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe offer just a mini session on the basics. You know.
I do how to be a great board member
Mhm.
at conferences sometimes. I've done it for the Cohawk conference. And again, it's a real based on this book. So I have something in my back pocket.
And not to create more work for Nichols, but you know, I mean, okay, I'm a little biased, but you know, Nichols is the best regional library, huh? You know, even having a video then that
Mm-hmm.
directors could point their board members to, you know, that they could look at their convenience, you know, and in a timely way. Just even a little 20-minute one could make a difference. Give people a few tools to do a better job with facilitating discussions and just going through a meeting. Also, understanding that the purpose of a board meeting is not to see how quickly you can get done, but to encourage important and strategic conversations that move the library forward. Okay.
I wonder if somebody could explain. I had a question come in about these different governance structures of libraries. And Robin might want to answer it, or Gina might. So Topeka Shawnee County obviously was a county library.
It's a consolidated district. It's a city county library. So that's why it's
Right.
called Topeka and Shawnee
And
County.
Shawnee County.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting model
Mhm.
because usually we see probably the majority of libraries are probably just city or township libraries.
Correct.
And that's where the boards are appointed and they get their revenue from inside the city limits. And so the question was about how do district libraries differ from those other structures?
The Topeka Shawnee County Public Library actually has its own section of the statutes. So there's law and that's just after there was a vote to actually create the consolidated library district. But those trustees, there's 10 trustees on that board and they're appointed. 7 are appointed by the city and 3 are appointed by the county. So it's a kind of different animal. If we have anybody here who's a trustee from a district library, it would be, I'd love to hear from them.
Right. Mike has unmuted. Maybe he'll.
Okay.
Dan, I'd generally say that as far as library boards go, there's really very little difference in the work you're doing. The difference is in how you came to be a board, because district library boards are elected and state statute spells out that process. And then your taxing area is going to be different. You're not taxing just within city limits. So like Meriden, Ozaki, they tax in Meriden and Ozaki, and then all of the other surrounding area that is part of that taxing district. Often it mirrors township boundaries. Sometimes it mirrors school districts.
And I guess we could add by saying that every Kansas resident pays taxes that go towards library services.
Yep.
And
Sorry about that.
so if you are not within a city or district that taxes, Neckles would then tax, and then that's how our organization then distributes funds back out to libraries through library development grants, competitive grants, continuing education series, answering the phone between 8 and 5 to be there for you all. So that's kind of how that whole structure works. And I would suggest, if you're ever curious more about that, the man who turned on his camera here and his mic would be a great resource to follow up on. I'm sure he could explain it even more succinctly with more time.
And I think I've managed to mess up my display here.
That's okay. If anybody, I will share resources with everybody who registered. So we have, about 50 plus more people who are probably planning on watching the video. So for those of you who are made it this far in the YouTube link, cheers to you. And those of you who've stayed online for our call today, thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. I realize that most of you are volunteering your time to be on your boards, and this is just one more morning that you're working, not spending it with your family, not going out to ball games, that type of thing. So we appreciate you just being here with us and having your questions and being part of our community and everything you do to make your community successful. And also thank you, Gina.
Oh, my pleasure.
For being with us. Pleasure to work with. Yeah, I see the claps coming. We will record an episode of our Unbound podcast with Gina, and that will be released this fall. So we do have more resources. Check out our website if you never do, and reach out to us. We're happy to hear from you and work on anything that is important to you. Any other questions or thoughts?
I also want to say thank you. This is Asta the Airedale. This is my girl. And she is also giving you her thanks because I won't be staying up past her bedtime anymore to work on this presentation. She goes,
All right,
to bed,
folks.
she goes to bed at 8.
Oh my. Robin's relating to that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
All right, dog and cat lovers. Let's all have a great weekend and a great summer and summer reading, capturing the adventure. It's great to have been with you all.
Absolutely. And I would say I'm putting my email and cell phone are there. If you want to just have a chat about something, I'm available. I'm happy to help out my colleagues when I can. So I always say, I've been around a while and I hope I've learned a few things. And so if I can be helpful, I would love to do that.
Great. Appreciate you doing
Thank
that.
you, Gina. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right,
Everybody
folks.
enjoy your Saturday.
Yes, enjoy your Saturday.
I haven't
Bye.
ruined all the ball games. The Royals start
Yes,
at
you're
3,
going to
so
Royals, aren't you?
Ooh, all right.
Going to the K.
we're off very shortly. So
Very
thank
cool.
you.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.